All right, we're here with Phyllis, and we've got a really interesting topic. We always like to develop a headline for these just to keep us, and I say us, to keep me focused, to keep me from going off into tangents and asking all kinds of questions. So I like to have a headline to keep me honest. And the headline for this is the leadership imperative to create and sustain healthy work environments. And I think that's an interesting term, and we're going to talk a lot about that, a healthy work environment, understanding and effectively managing bullying and incivility in the workplace. And, we've never talked about this particular topic in this way, and I'm really looking forward to it. And it's just so interesting, the difference between a healthy work environment where, whatever analogy you want to use, everyone's swimming in the same direction, singing off the same music sheet, versus when we don't trust each other, or there's toxic relationships, or there's a lack of communication. And it's just a massive, massive difference in the productivity of the company, the people that are there, what they're able to do, and obviously the ability to find and keep really talented people as well. So start off, at the top, how did you get involved in this work? How do you work with companies, and why do you work with companies in this space of healthy work environments?
So thank you for having me today, Tom. It's an important subject to me, so I really welcome the opportunity to share. So I am a nurse, and you would think that everybody is just lovely and wonderful in a caring environment or in a caring profession. Well, not so much. I'm really not sure, was it a bank robber or Willie Sutton or Dillinger, or somebody said, somebody asked him, why do you rob banks? And the answer was, well, that's where the money is. So when it comes to having a temperament or a personality that needs to be condoned, that needs, to be accommodating to gaslighting techniques, that needs to have the finish line always moved because you've discovered that people in healthcare have this wonderful gene of caring and always wanting to help, and sometimes take that to the extreme of wanting to fix, then it makes perfect sense that if you are someone who has some narcissistic overtones to their personality, and you happen to want to have a career in healthcare, that hospital environments are especially nurturing to you, because that's what we do. We try to offer the person, ways to see the light. We try to fix them. We try to help them. And what we are actually doing, and unfortunately what the staff knows you're doing as a leader, is enabling, which is taking caregiving to the dark side. So all the years that I have been a nurse, and before that a social worker, I've noticed that chronic incivility and outright bullying are pervasive in healthcare. It's unfortunate, but it's true. And I think some of the recent discourse that we see politically across the country, and some of the incivility and polarizing hurtful things that people say to one another at this point, whether it's face-to-face or in the media, kind of demonstrates that this is, a symptom of something much larger that we can no longer ignore.
Why do people bully?
So, because they can. All right, that's part of it. In terms of keeping, the information I want to share this evening within the healthcare industry or healthcare profession, let's define a bully as a narcissist with a license, or it may be a narcissist with a certification. But in order to really wrap your mind around the who, what, where, when, and why of why people choose to interact with people in a destructive manner, you first have to understand what makes a narcissist tick. And it's really important to understand who you're dealing with, because their ability to turn things around, to gaslight, to use plausible deniability as a tool in order to manipulate, confound, and confuse is really important to understand, because when you have that person, whether they are a staff person or a leader, who is engaging in what I call shadow behavior, bullying behavior, it doesn't usually happen overt unless that person really feels they have a lot of power and they can do it, they can behave however they feel. Most of bullying is in the shadows where plausible deniability lives. It's really about power. It is really engaging in behavior that is, many people really understand about bullies. Most people think that they are, they have these huge egos and that they are so, overconfident, and they just speak about their accomplishments and all of those other things. But what bullies are really desperately afraid of, narcissists are desperately afraid of, is being ordinary. So they portray themselves in ways that depict them as extraordinary, even though they are not. So if you start to get in the way of that, if you interfere with the storyline of that, if you all of a sudden realize all that glitters is not gold, then you are a real threat to the entity of their self-talk, of their persona, of their identity. And here's the major thing that you need to understand about narcissists or bullies is that you and I might get angry and you and I might push back, but they are compelled for revenge. And it's extremely important you understand that. So rule number one in engaging a bully is you never do it alone. Rule number one is that if you don't have the collaboration and the buy-in of executive leadership and human resources, don't even bother, because you will probably destroy your own reputation and be the one that's asked to leave the organization at the end of the day if you don't have a coordinated effort to corral all of the aberrant behaviors that bullies bring to the argument, to confuse, confound, just really depict themselves as the victim and you the bully.
Let me ask you this, because healthcare, and I'm thinking of a hospital structure, it seems like there's a pretty clear hierarchy of people, and there's this person, and then there's these people, and then there's these people. Do you feel like that type of an organizational structure lends itself to bullying and, a unhealthy workplace because there are power dynamics that are clear as day?
I think that probably has been a contributing factor in the past. Certainly that was the dominant thinking. It was a physician down organization. And until the late 90s, early to mid 90s, it was in many cases physician owned and operated until managed care happened. And then we had a lot of mergers and acquisitions and the buying up of things, and the understanding that healthcare is first an industry, and then the practice of medicine as a profession, or the practice of nursing as a profession, and those things get confused. There's definitely cultures that are still top down. Like you say, the hierarchy of healthcare is pretty well known to most, but if you layer academics on top of that, so that the person's not just a department head, but they are the chair of a academic department as well, it can get a little dicey to try to navigate and really understand have organizational awareness to keep your navigational skills honed to the point where you really can build relationships, as opposed to step on landmines that you may or may not see. But we are slowly but surely moving towards an interprofessional sense of healthcare, that we are moving towards it takes a village, or it takes a team in healthcare. We are moving towards physicians collaborating, and in some cases even going to class and being educated with nurses in the same classroom. There are programs, medical schools out there that have programs where nurse practitioners are attending or physician's assistants are attending. So they're trying to promote this interprofessional collaboration from the point of the student. So these are cutting edge programs. As you can imagine, we're probably a generation away from having that fully embraced. And it was one of the silver linings of COVID that that it took a village to save the planet. It was a silver lining to understand that environmental services was as important as anyone, that those prickly infection prevention people really saved our lives. That the surgeons were out on the medical units, and they are the swans of the OR. And if you take a swan out of the lake, they kind of waddle like a goose. So what were the surgeons going to do? And then they got very creative and realized they needed to do all the invasive things that unfortunately so many of those patients needed during COVID. So there was a leveling of the playing field and an empowerment that of togetherness of us against that virus that really, I think, served to, in many cases, bolus everybody with the understanding that interprofessional collaboration is the wave of the future. Unfortunately, I see a little slippage in that now that things are starting to kind of redefine themselves as the new post-pandemic healthcare. But I think that's something that's retrievable. I think that the strides that we can make to create and sustain healthy work environments where we understand everybody has different roles, but we also value everyone's different role and respect what they bring to the table.
It's really interesting. And part of what I hear you saying is that, hey, when we broke down some of those barriers and, put the patient in the middle and all surrounded the patient and helped versus thinking there was like a hierarchy of people and that were involved, it helped. And so, a lot of the organizations that I really admire either don't have an organizational chart or they have, what they may call a flat, model where we all know what we need to do, but we're all on the same team. We're all wearing the same jersey. No one's any more or less important than anyone else. Hey, I may be the owner of the company, but my door's open and you call me Bill, you don't call me Sir or Mr. Smith. And so it just sounds like, when you do that, when you present an organization as equals, we may not all make the same amount. We may not all have the same education, whatever that might be, but we're all, trying to solve the same problem. It really helps out. So what are some of the, go ahead, please.
There is a distinction. And I don't want to lose that distinction. The distinction is licensure. The distinction is that there is a bit of a hierarchy because depending on your academic preparation, your certifications, and your licensure, you work under the direction or the auspices of someone who has, greater academic preparation and licensure above yours. So that hierarchy is somewhat built into healthcare, but that doesn't mean that's a standard of practice. That is a fact that it's there, but it doesn't dictate how we interact with one another on a personal basis. It doesn't dictate the ability to create psychological safety around teamwork. It's just a matter of fact that we have to do that. So part of that is in that, and then also understanding that a lot of healthcare is built on a military model. Certainly nursing has roots in the military. That's where our uniforms come from. It also has roots in religious life. That's where the cap comes from and wearing white. And, so there's a lot of heritage and, and weaved into all of that as far as hierarchy and who's on first and what's on second. But we're definitely evolving not to have a flat organization, but rather we're looking to have like an upside down pyramid where the patient is at the center of everything we're doing, and that we serve the patient and we serve them from our different perspectives. And that is definitely the model that we're aspiring to and trying to, create an anchor.
Yeah, the patient's the customer. I mean, it's the same concept. Walk us through what some of the best practices or elements are of a healthy work environment.
So there's a lot of work out there by some very, very important people about what constitutes a healthy work environment. So Dr. Christina Matlock is someone who has published a lot. She has published on the healthcare burnout scale that's widely used when we're trying to measure different types of resilience, well-being, and the effects of burnout. She's also done a lot of work around healthy work environments. The IHI, which is the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, has also done a lot of work around joy in the workplace. Understanding that it can't all be heavy, 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 that there has to be something that smooths out some of the struggles that, you hear people say, if I only could do my job, that'd be fine, but I can't get this and I can't get that and this doesn't work. It's really, that initiative was to take the pebbles out of the shoe, if you will. But I think some of the most important work has been done by the American Association of Critical Care Nurses, and they actually came out with 6 pillars of a healthy work environment that center around communication, collaboration, leadership, recognition, decision-making, and staffing. And while Christina Matlock's work is extremely important and why the IHI's work is also very valuable, pretty much those 3 entities are saying those same things, that there's 5 or 6 things we should be leaning in on. What they don't talk about is disruptive behavior. And that's where I saw my value in being able to add to the body of knowledge around creating and sustaining a healthy work environment, was really leaning into how do we first understand and then effectively manage disruptive behavior. In the healthcare organization, it's everything, to me, it's a top-down type of thing. If you don't have civility as part of your underlying culture, if you don't have respect as part of that underlying culture, you're a doomed culture. There has to be more than just human resource policies and procedures around codes of conduct and zero tolerance for, abusive behavior. And then we have to understand there's also going to be a difference between things that are legal and then things that are cultural. Okay, so that, if somebody is being abusive and they're misusing power and demanding things like quid pro quo, that's illegal, as opposed to someone being just terribly uncivil and really not being aware of how their behavior affects the workplace. That's more cultural.
You kind of glossed over a term I want you to define and give us some context on: disruptive behavior. Mm-hmm. So what is disruptive behavior? What are some examples?
So, there are a lot of things that can come under disruptive behavior, but I put it into 2 buckets. There are those that are chronically uncivil. Now, I can be irritated. The red hair is real. I can get aggravated in a hurry. I can go from 0 to 90 in a heartbeat. Okay. I'm sure there are moments that you take off like a rocket as well. We're not talking about, episodically losing it and episodically being, I guess, just not fully aware of how we're coming across and maybe saying something which we know as soon as it's out of our mouth or how we behaved, we regret immediately and we want to make amends. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about chronic incivility and then the shadow behavior of bullying. Chronic incivility is out there. It's out there for everybody to see. And, when I crisscross the country, talking with nursing executive leaders, we pretty much talked about, well, how big is the issue? So by and large, about 85 to 90% of our staff, we agreed, come to work ready, willing, and able to give world-class care and act in a collegial manner. So that leaves about 15% that come under the umbrella of disruptive behavior. And of that 15%, we divided into chronic incivility and bullying. Chronic incivility makes up about 10% of that 15, with bullying making up 3 to 5% of the remaining piece, which can be good news. That actual bullies in the workplace are only 3 to 5% of your staff. The problem is the ripple effect they have. You only need one bully on one shift to destroy culture in a department.
Sure.
So they may be small in numbers, but large in effect. But that's really it. So you know, if you're looking at someone who's chronically uncivil, that covers all of the behaviors that are so aggravating and distracting that it's extremely difficult for you to focus in on your work and do your job in a manner that is safe, that you can enjoy, that you can troubleshoot. The disruptive behavior from someone who's chronically uncivil really is that annoying kind of always in your ear, bringing in their family life, bringing in personal life, you know, things that should not be spoken about at work, you know, especially in the work area, but leading into those things, drama kings or queens, chronically late to work, you know, the dog always died, the bird fell always the tree, you know, fell out of the tree. There's always an excuse for why they just can't get with the program. They require constant accommodation. And because they are so annoying, people want to just ignore them, hoping that it'll all go away. And that what's happening is that the rest of the staff then has to kind of manage this chronic incivility. This is the person who, if they call in sick, you know you're going to have a better day. That's the person I'm talking about. And they suck the air out of the room. They just destroy morale. Everybody feels that they are being treated differently, and they are. Everybody feels like, you know, this is so in your face, blatant. Why isn't somebody doing it about it? And there's always a sob story, if you will, or some kind of drama around why we have to make an accommodation, or can't you just, you know, I don't have time, you know, for this, can't you just pick up the pieces? So there is a misuse of all of your go-to people. And if you really want to kill morale and bleed talent, that's what you do. That's a good strategy to do that.
So if someone like this is around, how do you deal with it? I mean, what are some of the best practices, and what are some of the mistakes that you see people make? Maybe start with the mistakes. Like how do people react to this that either makes it worse or ends up costing them their job? And what should they do instead?
So let's talk about the coworker. Let's talk about that. That coworker is probably going to have enough at one point, or probably going to be a hair's breadth away from making a mistake because they were distracted by what else, the antics that were going on. And they go to their supervisor, their manager, director, and, you know, they say, listen, you got to do something here. And, you know, I've done all I can. I can't do my work around this. I can't work under this kind of a structure. And there is a laissez-faire approach to behavior. So, you know, if it's a performance thing, that's one thing. But when you talk about behavior, the laissez-faire type of leader and the person who's going to really be responsible for allowing toxic behavior to go unchecked is really going to say, listen, you guys have to work this out amongst yourself. You have to do something. And then meanwhile, they circle back and say they can't get this chronically uncivil person to do overtime or do whatever it needs to pull the team up together. I need you to do it. In other words, they're useless, but you're great. So you need to do part of their work. And it may not actually be in those words, but that is certainly the message that goes out there. Not, you know, if you have a leader in a department who is, you know, tied to their chair, they never get up and round. You know, there's two types of rounding that need to happen, you know, for effective transformational leadership in the 21st century in healthcare. And you do your purposeful rounding around your patients and their families, but then you round a second time or concurrently around your staff to see how your staff is going, to make sure that they have what they need. And you need to be able to, you know, step out of, you know, what's right in front of you and take a look at the bigger picture and really see where the incivility is happening in forms of disruptive behavior, in forms of, you know, they can't get their work done on time. They you know, are always complaining. They're, you know, disruptive and disrespectful on the phone. They've started a conversation with a family member that did not go well, and now everybody has to respond to kind of clean that up. It's just this ongoing, can't get it right kind of behavior that either you tolerate or you address. But unless you want to bleed talent, you better address.
Well, I want to go back to something you said earlier. You said that, hey, 3 to 5%, gosh, that's nothing. Who cares? Well, that's not the issue. The issue is what that 3.5 or 3 to 5% does to the 95 to 97%, because it spreads and affects everyone. So, kind of real world, what happens when someone behaves in some of the ways that you're describing? What does that do to the other 10 or 20 or 30 people that are surrounding that person in a work environment? What does it cause them to do, how they feel, how it affects their day, how it affects their work?
So just to be clear, when we're talking about chronically uncivil, that's about 10%. Okay. And when we're talking about true bullying, we're talking 3 to 5%. But let's stay on the chronically uncivil. You're going to find that people just either shut down. They start to say, okay, clearly this is not an organization I can buy into. So what I need to do now is hedgehog. So hedgehogging is I come to work on time. I do my work well to the best of my capability. I take my lunch alone. I take my break alone. I don't get involved in any activities that you would say is one of the reasons why you might have a great place to work environment. And then the bell rings and I'm out of there. I don't call in sick. I don't abuse anything, but I am shut down and I'm going to the worst form of, or a maladaptive coping skill, which is really isolation, which to me is a sin against God, because professional caregivers by definition are people who need people. But you're not creating an environment where that it's safe. So people are always on edge as to whether, if they go to lunch and they have to endorse their patients over to someone else, is that person really going to watch their patients? So one of the behaviors you see is when they're buddied with this person and that person has to now take the responsibility of their patients or their work while they're on break, or while they're escorting a patient to a test, or while they're in dinner. They rather not do that. They'll say, somebody else needs to take this patient. I have to focus on my other patients. I don't need a break. I don't need dinner, because there's no psychological safety around that person actually doing the right thing for their patients. So you see a lot of tired people who are, hungry and dehydrated, and then irritable because this is no way to work. And this is just not going to happen. The person, of course, at the heart of all of this, the chronically uncivil person, not only do they get their break and their lunch, they don't come back on time from their break or their lunch. They push the edge of the envelope to extend it with some reason as to why they couldn't get back on time. And again, it's tolerated unless you're really going to keep your eyes open as a leader and understand that the first responsibility I have to my team is to create an environment where people thrive and not just survive.
And I hope those listening, whether they're in healthcare or not, understand the effect that this behavior has on everyone. Because now what you're describing is people aren't eating, they're getting irritable, they hate their job, but they're showing up because they have to work somewhere. But how's that person's physical and mental health if they dread going to work and don't enjoy it and have no friends or human interaction there? How's it affecting their work? I'd imagine it's virtually impossible to be at your best. You may be trying your hardest, but if you're not sleeping well and you're not happy, you're obviously not going to be the best version of your professional self.
It's very difficult to take care of a patient by yourself. You need your backup. You need you need to be able to step out at the door and say, I need help, and know someone's going to respond who's competent and capable. To the extreme, I know people who change their vacations and their days off around trying to make sure they don't work with that person. If that person's taking vacation, I'll work that week and take vacation another week, simply because that gives me 2 weeks when I don't have to deal with that nonsense or that kind of an environment. People will go to extremes. And then, of course, this kind of chronic stress, has its stress injuries. People, the morale starts to, tank. People get somatic. People take mental health days. There's definitely a loss of productivity. But at the heart of it all is there's no enthusiasm to pull in the same direction for the team, because you're condoning and giving most of your attention to the squeaky wheel, and the rest of us are not getting acknowledged. The rest of us are being asked to pick up the slack, and then you're willing to tolerate this in your department, but what about us? We're not willing to tolerate it. So you bleed talent.
Yeah, and your squeaky wheel analogy is so true, because that's what happens is we end up spending a ridiculous amount of time and energy dealing with the worst player on the team.
And then the word goes out on the street. So now you have vacancies in your department, and people are thinking about transferring, especially maybe off the evening and night shift to a day shift position, something a little bit more, normal hours with day life integration and balance. And people don't apply for the job on your department, and you've got these gaps and you can't recruit. So now it's going to take you longer to find somebody who's outside. The recruiting expenses go up and everything else. But the word on the street is, I'd rather stay on nights in a department where, civility rules and the culture is collaborative, then apply to that unit where I might be on the day shift, but I can't work with that person, or I can't work with those people, or that leader who will not do what's needed and, right in front of them.
Well, and I feel like in a lot of these talks, it comes up, and I want to bring it up to you and get your feelings on as well. But I feel like sometimes in many organizations, we neglect the fact to just understand that people are people, and these are all human beings that are on your team, and we have to remember that they're not machines. And so just because they're paying a wage and showing up doesn't mean that they're operating at their best self. It doesn't mean they need proper sleep, they need to have friends and relationships, they need to feel connected to the work and feel like they're making a difference. Like, if these basic needs are not being met, then we have a major problem. And I think we forget that, and we think, okay, well, you're getting paid, go do your job and show up, and here's your shift. And it's not machinery that's building a product, it's human beings that are delivering a service.
So, some of the best organizations that I know of are doing annual staff satisfaction surveys. And it's really a report card on leadership, if you will, with the understanding it's a report card on the department as well. But, staff satisfaction surveys really kind of say, am I satisfied? What are my metrics? And those correspond to engagement scores, and engagement scores correspond to quality care. So, even though we're not leaning in necessarily as we could to understand and effectively manage disruptive behavior, the time and effort that you're trying to build morale, the time and effort you're trying to get your your patient satisfaction scores up, the time and effort that you're trying to spend getting your staff engagement scores up is kind of like throwing spaghetti on the wall if you're not going to deal with what everybody knows, which is this disruptive behavior that is the heart of everything.
Kind of off topic, but I'm really curious what you think. Obviously there's some unique structure to how nurses schedule their weeks, right? 3 12s or 4 10s. Do you have a strong feeling on what's healthy and what's best? And is there anything, I wonder if people listening in different industries could say, oh, maybe we need to rethink the traditional 9 to 5 Monday to Friday. So just curious your thoughts and experience on that.
So I'm here in New York, and I can tell you, I come from the generation of 3 shifts, 3 8-hour shifts. And then we started going to school, and we started not only finishing up a baccalaureate degree, but going on for master's and clinical certifications. And of course, nurses will have families and have lives outside of that. And we started this conversation back in the late 80s around healthy, workplace balance, and that's when the whole idea of, well, is 8-hour shifts really working, or should we have 10 or 12-hour shifts? I was a big proponent of the 12-hour shift. And I regret that now, to be very honest with you. The whole idea behind the 12-hour shift was to give your body time to rest, whether you were days or nights. It was also to give you time to be able to spend quality time with your family, go to school if you chose to, work on a clinical certification, have all of the things that we said we couldn't do because we were working 5 days a week. It didn't work out like that. I would say a large portion of nurses could not resist the temptation of having 3 to 4 days off a week and working a second job. And that could partially be related to the salaries that nurses were commanding back in the 80s, which was nothing to, really write home about, and also dealing with, the economic times of the 80s and you might be paying off school loans and all the other things that come with it. So there was definitely a situation that was created where, just for round numbers, let's say you made $50,000 a year, and now you're doing your 3 days a week, 12-hour days, and now you can work 1, maybe 2 days more. So now you're bringing home, let's just say, $75,000 a year. And everybody tells themselves, I'm paying off the mortgage, I'm saving for college education, I'm doing all of these things, but then we don't really do that. The $75,000 a year now becomes the lifestyle we move into. And then there's no going back, because now you have to work 5 12-hour days in order to support that lifestyle. And I do believe that that was a big part of the burnout situation that happened with nurses. It didn't necessarily contribute to incivility and bullying. It certainly contributed to irritability. But unless you were prone to chronic incivility, you were just tired and maybe, a little less than pleasant, but you still did your work. You still acted in a collegial manner. If you were chronically uncivil and doing that, it made the situation worse. And if you were a bully and doing that, it made the situation worse. But it's not the reason why people chose to be chronically uncivil or bullying. That is a chosen behavior and mindset in people, not necessarily the consequence of burnout.
As we wrap up, is there anything that we didn't discuss that you want to share, or is there anything that, hey, you said it, but you want to make sure to reinforce it so it sticks in people's minds as we wrap up?
So we really didn't talk about the issue of bullying, okay? And that is the most destructive behavior, where someone who's chronically uncivil can be annoying. Someone who actually bullies and takes enjoyment out of belittling someone else, they're destructive, and they really should not be tolerated. So again, you never take on a bully without having the buy-in of executive leadership and human resources, or it could really blow up in your face. But you do have to understand how a narcissist acts and how they think. It will always be around the guise of plausible deniability and gaslighting, which are the dysfunctional forms of communication that they engage in. So it will always be, you misunderstood me. Oh, that's your interpretation. That's not why I said it. They'll always do things in the shadows where people can't corroborate what you're saying, so that plausible deniability reigns. So, they will do whatever they can to make you believe that it's you. And if you're the leader, if you're a leader and you're leading someone who's a narcissist bully, you need to understand they're going to tell you exactly what you want to hear so that you back off. They will play to your need to be a caregiver. They'll play to your need to maybe be praised. And then they will laugh as they're going out the door that they just bought themselves some more time to keep doing what they're doing. And the rest, the 85% of your staff that's really, pulling all the weight, is looking at you like, boy, you just bought the farm again. You just bought it all. How stupid could you possibly be? They told you exactly what you wanted to hear. Bullying behavior is like any other form of abusive behavior. It's cyclical. There is a bullying event. You call them on their behavior. There's a period of remorse. There's a period of over solicitation. They're good as gold, good as gold. Then there is an irritability, and then something triggers the bullying behavior again. Just like domestic violence, just like child abuse or elder abuse, it's an abusive behavior. and you cannot change it. So anybody who thinks they can fix a narcissist or cure bullying, you can give me a buzz. I put out there that the only real plan of action on these 3 to 5% is that you do enough documentation on their aberrant behavior and all the steps you've tried to take them to show them the light, that you can actually take the paperwork and pave a road to the door, because the only thing you can do with a bully is let them go. Somebody who's chronically uncivil, if you want to invest the time, the effort, the money, and the resources, and it's a lot of time, effort, money, and resources, go right ahead. I can help you through that and guide you how to do that. But with a bully, your end game is either you create a situation that is intolerable for them and they leave, or you have enough documentation to support the lawsuit, the wrongful termination that will come because they're revenge oriented, and then you get them to exit your organization.
Do these people, I mean, do they know they're doing this? Is it so they are well aware of what they're doing?
So the only reason why I say to you, don't even bother trying to change a bully is most people are aware that the number one ingredient for any kind of personal change is an understanding and identification of a need to change, right?
Sure.
So a narcissist has no need to change. The narcissist will talk over, through you, around you, using plausible deniability and gaslighting to convince you that it's the environment that needs to change, the staff that needs to change, the policy is wrong, you need to change, I need to be accommodated because I am fine. And one of the key things that you'll find is there's just a chronic lack of, and it's not a lack, it's an inability to accept responsibility and accountability for anything they do. It is always someone else. They will perpetuate a lie and tell you the lie over and over and over again in the hopes that you will think it's true.
Well, I think that's one of the big takeaways from this is just that, you know, you're not going to wave a magic wand and change someone. You're not going to tell them off or, you know, scare them straight.
And if you do that, more than likely, they're going to go victim on you, and you're going to be the one that's identified as the bully, and you're the one that's going to be terminated, which is why you don't do this unless you have a collaboration of executive leadership, human resources, and yourself. But really, my message to the leadership, any leadership in any venue for the 21st century, is that we are leaning in now to creating our own sense of resilience. We are taking responsibility for our own sense of well-being, and you cannot ask anyone to, you know, really develop their own resilience, take time for self-care, promote their sense of well-being, and then ask them to work in a toxic environment. It just won't work that way. So if we're asking the workers, all right, to have a stronger sense of responsibility around their own sense of well-being and healthcare and resilience, then we have an imperative to create a healthy work environment to support the efforts that they are making.
Incredibly ironic that the bully becomes the victim.
It's a technique that's used every day.
Yeah. You know, I hate to make this generalization, but it's just, I feel like so often when you understand these things, and you're doing an incredible job of explaining them, but the textbook is usually right, and the patterns are usually very clear. You know, these things are not that complicated when you take the time to understand them. And when this behavior happens, it's like clockwork. The patterns are clear, the behavior's clear, and to think that you're going to do anything to break that, it's just not. You need to be very methodical as to how you handle it, and you've given some great instructions.
So again, it thrives in healthcare where people want to, you know, invest in you and work with you and strengthen you and show you the light, and you know,
I can fix this.
I can fix this. You know, if I just put a little bit more time and effort into this person, there's going to be this miraculous song from heaven with the angels celebrating the fact that they just saw the light. Not going to happen. Not ever.
Well, this was really interesting. I really appreciate you sharing this. For those that are listening or watching this, who do you typically work with in your private practice? How do you help them? If someone wants to get a hold of you, how can they reach you?
So they can go to my website, which is MFW Michael Frank William, mfwconsultants.com. And they can reach me that way. They can certainly go to my email, again, mfwconsultants@gmail.com. I am all over LinkedIn. Please reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn multiple times a day and easily accessible that way.
Good. Well, we appreciate your time, your knowledge, just really interesting stuff. And thank you so much for joining us. And I know everyone listening and watching got a lot of value out of this as well. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Tom, because it's something near and dear, and I appreciate the forum.